The European Union says it's ready to impose never-seen-before sanctions if Russia attacks Ukraine. The bloc's foreign ministers meeting in Brussels have agreed to send a unified warning to Moscow. Tensions are soaring over Russia's deployment of 100,000 troops at its neighbour's border. Moscow insists it has no intention of invading. NATO says it's putting forces on standby and reinforcing Eastern Europe with more ships and fighter jets. The EU is working with the US on a sanctions package. Denmark says it will be stronger than the sanctions of 2014, which targeted Russian energy, banking and defence sectors. For now, the EU will not be following the US and the UK in withdrawing its diplomats' families in Kiev. It says there is no need to dramatise the situation while talks with Russia continue.
Secretary Blinken will explain us the reasons of this announcement. We are not going to do the same thing because we don't know any specific reasons, but Secretary Blinken will inform us, and I don't think we have to dramatize. As far as the negotiations are going on, and they are going on, I don't think that we have to let Ukraine and leave.
Rosie Burchard joins us live. Rosie, an ongoing concern, the EU lack of unity within the bloc for how to react should Russia invade Ukraine. Where are we on the EU approach right now on the Ukraine crisis?
Well, EU ministers meeting here in Brussels are striving to show a strong, united, one-voice approach to this situation on Russia's borders with Ukraine. That's mainly based on three main goals. First of all, pursuing and encouraging a diplomatic solution. Secondly, providing support to Ukraine. And thirdly, to really stand ready to impose massive sanctions should any invasion occur. Now, on that support, we've had an announcement just in the past few hours. The European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen has announced a new €1.2 billion support package for Ukraine. However, when it comes to other forms of support, particularly when it comes to arms export, military support, there is less consensus there among the bloc, particularly with Germany over the weekend exposing itself as an outlier by saying that it believes sending lethal weapons to Ukraine would not help diffuse tensions. That puts it at odds with the US, the UK and potentially other EU member states. Now, when it comes to sanctions, the EU member states do appear united in their resolve to reissue warnings to Russia that any incursion into Ukraine would result in massive consequences. The Lithuanian foreign minister said to reporters today on his way in that the consequences, that any sanctions would simply be unbearable. Now, diplomats here are very tight-lipped on what kind of sanctions those could actually include. They are being drawn up at the moment, but of course they don't want Russia to know what they have in mind. So they will not be communicating today on what kind of sanctions there will be, but they will be reaffirming their position that any sanctions would be dramatic, would be massive, and they'll also be reaffirming their solidarity with Ukraine and its territorial integrity.
Rosie, of course, not just maintaining solidarity with Ukraine, but also maintaining some kind of open relations, ability to talk with Russia. And on that note, the EU not joining the US in taking diplomat families out of Ukraine. So what message is the EU sending to Moscow there?
Well, we do know the EU doesn't have plans at the moment to evacuate staff or families from its representation in Ukraine. What we don't know is whether this really is a political stance. Josep Borrell, the bloc's foreign policy chief, did say on his way into the meeting there were no plans in sight, but he mentioned that should the US Secretary of State, Antony Blinken, who's joining the talks virtually, provide information that would suggest evacuation was necessary, they could essentially reconsider that decision. And I think it's important to note that Borrell was likely talking about the EU diplomatic staff, so those that are directly tied to the European Union's External Action Service. However, the EU member states do have their own bilateral diplomatic relations and representations in Ukraine, and we can't exclude that they could take different approaches here and that we might hear updates on this in the next hours and days. Now, it could be understood that the European Union here is just trying to really show its position once again that de-escalating is the number one priority, that de-escalating tensions and trying to find this diplomatic solution is really what they're looking for. But what really remains to be seen is whether this decision not to evacuate staff is a political stance or if it's rather just a placeholder until there is a greater level of coordination with the US.
Thanks for that, Rosie Burchett there in Brussels.